Hi. So this week I'm going to talk about grief. A veterinarian had me do a video for their business website to console people who had lost a pet. And it made me realize I don't talk much about grief. Most of my videos about life skills, thought management, emotion regulation, stuff like that. And grief is something that all of us experience. So today and this week I'm going to do a couple of videos about grief. So let's dive right in. Grief isn't just about death. You don't have to lose a person to be grieving. I think that's one of the most missed truths about grief. We save the word for funerals or the big obvious losses, and then we end up walking around carrying all kinds of other grief without really even acknowledging it. A divorce, a job that was a big part of our life, changes in health and physical abilities, maybe a friendship that grew in different directions, the kids growing up and the house becoming really quiet, a move away from a place that was familiar to you, a future you had your heart set on that just isn't going to happen. Those are losses too, and they can ache just as much. So grief is what happens when something meaningful ends or changes. Death is one kind of it. It's not every kind of loss. So if you've been feeling heavy over a loss that isn't really recognized as outwardly as death, I want you to know that you're not overreacting. You're grieving. And it helps to understand how grief works. I don't think there's enough information out there about the various aspects of grief. There is a name for grief that nobody really recognizes or talks about. It's called disenfranchised grief. And it's the losses that don't get much acknowledgement or support. I mean, nobody brings you a casserole when your marriage ends, or when you leave the career that you spent 20 years building, or maybe when the future that you pictured is quietly fading from your vision. So you grieve it alone, and on top of that, you may even judge yourself for grieving something that isn't labeled as loss per se. So that's two layers of pain, the loss itself and the loneliness of carrying it around, unacknowledged, unseen. Naming it as grief is really the first step toward creating space for processing the grief and healing. So this is where understanding grief can be sometimes relieving. Some people think that grief comes in these 5 neat stages: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance, and that you move through these in some sort of order and you reach a stage of being finished. Those stages refer to a model of grief by Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who was originally describing people who were dying, not the people that were left behind grieving. Over the years, I think it got borrowed and turned into some checklist for grief that was, it's not truly functional for processing grief. Those stages are real and they make a lot of sense. I don't think they address the complexities of grieving overall. And treating grief like some checklist, I think, can do some pretty decent harm, because grief does not move in a straight line. You can feel something like acceptance on a Tuesday and be deep in depression by Thursday because you heard a song that activated a memory and some feelings. When you're expecting these 5 tidy steps and your grief keeps looping back, it's easy to think you're doing it wrong, or that you're not moving forward, that you're going to be stuck there forever, and that just isn't true. That looping around is exactly how grief behaves. Sometimes you'll feel sadness and then acceptance, and then you'll pop back into bargaining or denial, maybe back into sadness and then back into acceptance. But I do believe, and I have seen and lived myself over time, you will find yourself staying in acceptance for longer and longer periods of time. And then an anniversary or birthday will roll around and pull you out of the acceptance phase. So if not stages, then what? Well, researchers who study grief have a few frameworks that address grief pretty effectively. I'd like to go through a few of those with you today so you have some options that may match your experience. Having a framework that describes your experience can offer some relief all on its own. One framework talks about grief being like waves, not stages, and the waves come in and recede, crashing in quickly at times and other times more slowly and not as forcefully. Out of nowhere, a wave can come crashing in, but over time, the waves are going to come in further apart and in no predictable rhythm. Another framework is called the dual process model, and it's one of my favorites. It says you naturally shift back and forth between two modes. One is facing the loss, the sadness, the missing, the feeling of it, and the other is stepping back into your life, the errands, the work, the ordinary moments. That back and forth is not an avoidance of the pain or grief. That shifting back and forth is how I believe healthy grieving works. You're not meant to sit in the pain nonstop and forever. You're not meant to bury it either. So you move between. You shift back and forth. I have an exercise I provide for my clients called mindful grieving, where shifting between the two modes is done deliberately, mindfully, and in small increments that are more tolerable for the psychological and emotional system. A third framework is a beautiful method for changing how you hold grief. You don't get over a loss, and you don't try and minimize it. You grow your life around it. The grief stays the same size it is, and you grow. You become larger than the grief feels. You slowly build a life with more in it, and that loss lives inside the bigger life instead of grief swallowing you whole. And that's why acceptance was never really meant to be about being done. Acceptance is more about living with grief. It's about carrying it differently. And there's a gentle way to think about the work of grieving, sometimes called the tasks of mourning. Instead of stages you pass through, there are things that you gradually move toward, in no particular order. Letting the loss be there, be real, feeling the pain instead of pushing it away or ignoring it. Adjusting to a life that's shaped differently after the loss and finding a way to carry what was lost with you as you keep living. Not steps, just the work at your own pace. Now, another thing I think important to talk about, because I find this catches people off guard, is that grief is not just sadness. It brings anger at the situation, the unfairness, sometimes at the person or the thing that's gone. It brings guilt and endless should-haves. It can bring numbness, where you feel nothing and then panic that something's wrong with you for not feeling. It can bring relief, especially after a long illness or a conflictual or intense experience. And then relief is often followed by some shame for feeling relieved. So you can feel several of these things all at once. You can be grateful and devastated. You can feel relieved and heartbroken. And none of it may make sense. And none of it has to make sense. And none of it means you're grieving wrong. There's no right or wrong way. So if you're grieving anything right now, a person, a marriage, a job, a familiar place, your health, a future that you had your heart set on, I hope this takes a little bit of the weight off. There's no schedule you need to keep. Grief is going to come in waves. It's going to swing you between the pain and continuing with your life. And your life can slowly grow around it. However you find to be a helpful way to grieve for you. Remember to be gentle with yourself throughout whatever your process looks like. So I created this mindful grieving course that I wish I would have had when my mother passed away. I was 13 and no one explained to me what had just happened, that my whole world just changed. Life carried on as usual. The day after she was gone, the family carried on. And that kept me struggling and feeling lost for many years. So the course is one of many inside of my Enjoy Being Human school community. And the link's in the description if you want to join us. But because this is tender, and if you're struggling, please don't carry it alone. Reach out to someone. Tell me in the comments what's a loss that you carried or have been carrying recently. Maybe one the world doesn't even acknowledge as grief. Loss is loss, and it can be painful. We lose some things, like you might lose your keychain, and you process that pretty quickly. Oh man, that was my favorite keychain. And then you move on. Some people, jobs, things that are more deeply embedded into our heart and lives might take more time, to more patience, more compassion with yourself. So remember, there's no right or wrong way. And remember, you're not alone. I'm going to list a grieving resource in the comments, and I want you to know that you don't have to do this by yourself. So I will continue our talks about grief this week. May do another video later on. So I love you. Take care of yourself, and I'm sending you peace and light.